Stan Thompson, a futurist and Hydrail pioneer, worked at AT&T in the Environment and Transportation Department. He helped launch the Hydrail Conferences. He used the experience and connections accumulated at AT&T to help universities convene the annual non-profit International Hydrail Conferences, held conferences in the US, Denmark, Spain, Turkey, UK, Canada, Austria, Germany, and Italy. This is Energy News Biz Hydrail interview series. To support it, please check out our advertising options in the description. Thank you. And now, here's Stan Thompson. Who is Stan Thompson?
Stan Thompson is a retired telephone planner from AT&T who has been interested in science and in the humanities all my life. And so I have been characterized as a polymath, which I take as a very great kindness. And I was also very much involved in public service. And in that context, we got involved in Hydrail, hoping to have the rail line from our small town of Mooresville to the larger town of Charlotte, about 15 kilometers, to be the first Hydrail line in the world. We ran into all manner of difficulty on that, and eventually the line was no longer available. So we had our choice of either giving up the project altogether or taking it global. And by that time we had made contact with people in many countries to try to verify the feasibility of hydrogen rail and to find out who all was working on it. And we decided to take it global instead, and that's what happened. And we were quite successful in most ways.
So that was the start of the Hydrail.
That's right, and in that context, the federal. I had worked when I was in the telephone company with the federal government on issues of transportation, and I had kept in touch with them, and they invited me to come and address them in 2003, in August 2003, on a civilian application of a military Hydrail project that they were working on secretly. And I did that. And that was when we coined the term Hydrail first. Shortly afterwards, it was in the IJEH or something. And that was a learned journal, and that's where it first appeared in print. And it was chosen as a search engine target, so that everyone who was working on it could find everybody else's published work by just putting in the one word Hydrail, and HY for hydrogen, HYD for hydrogen, and RAIL. And that worked pretty good for about 10 years until copywriters decided they would that they had not heard of that, and so they started calling it hydrogen rail. And so you had to have two search targets to find out what's going on, and it was rather like the story of the Tower of Babel in the Bible, where everybody was given a different language, and it disrupted the production and hurt us pretty badly when the generic terms started using. But that's as it is. That's a little of the background.
And how the Hydrail conferences started?
My colleague, the former mayor of Mooresville, was a major in philosophy in college, and I majored in electrical engineering, business administration, chemistry, and English literature. And so we were both interested in philosophy, though. So we sat in his back room in his jewelry store, and we figured out how can we change the whole world without raising capital, uh, and without forming a corporation. And we decided to get the people, the experts who existed, and put them all in one room at one time, and let them know A, that each other existed and were trying to do the same thing, and B, what best practices they had discovered were. And so in 2005, we raised $20,000. That was very hard to do. And we got support from the Bank of America's Environmental Club, the State Energy Office, and the Central Iowa Council of Governments, and the two chambers of commerce in Mooresville, in Charlotte. And we rented a hotel room, and we got everybody together, and we had our conference, and it was quite successful. The next year, Denmark was not able to be there in person, but they sent their PowerPoint, which I gave on their behalf. And the next year, they hosted it in Herning, Denmark, in the Jutland Peninsula. And it was much more successful because they had all the connections with the EU countries. And I think we had 10 countries that second one. And the next year, we brought it back to the US at Catawba College in Salisbury, North Carolina. And that's when India and Italy joined us, and that led within a few years to the creation of the first Hydrail PhD at the University of Pisa. Our Indian participant got the PhD, studied the PhD, and our Italian ones helped create the thing. So we have the honor of having created a PhD program in one of the oldest universities in the world, at Pisa. From there on, it continued. Let's see, we had one in Valencia, Spain, and Toronto, and Birmingham. But everything came to its desired conclusion in 2013 at the 8th International Hydrail Conference. And that is when the CEO of Hydrogenics, Mr. Wilson, I can't think of his first name, was our opening speaker. And in the crowd was an engineer from Alstom, and he made contact with France, and a number of people talked to each other. And 2 years later, they announced that they had sold the first fleet of 40 Hydrail trains to Germany, built in Salzgitter. And once it had started, then it was like dominoes. The Siemens announced a hydrogen train, and China Railway Rolling Stock had also been at the 2013 conference, and they announced two in short order, and so it was an established thing. And then the only question was, how can you make it happen faster? Because one of the things that we were trying to do was to diminish the carbon dioxide footprint of the whole rail industry, and so speed was everything. But it went on, and we had one in Turkey and another one in England, and this went on, and they got larger each year and got more involving the rail industry and the hydrogen industry, until we had the COVID epidemic, and those two we had online on Zoom. Fortunately, from University of British Columbia, Gordon Lovegrove, Dr. Gordon Lovegrove. And I can't remember whether you have interviewed him yet or not. He'll be a good interview.
Not yet.
I recommend him. So he was enterprising enough to keep it going online during the COVID things. And then the last one we had was in Raleigh, and the Deutsche Bahn, the German National Railways, is very active in leading Hydrail in the United States and North America. And they jointly with the North Carolina State University hosted the last one. It was both online and in person. We have not got a location for this one yet. Last year, it was to have been in the northern countries on the edge of Russia, but when Russia invaded Ukraine, that they became essentially a war front, and they had to cancel it, and that's how we happened to have it in Raleigh at NC State. And so we were hoping to have this, and may still in Quebec, because the first island train is running up there right now, but we have not been able to find a sponsor, and so I had the misfortune of losing my wife earlier this year, so I haven't been able to put my attention on it to the degree that I have in years. But next year we hope to, even if we don't get it set up this year, and I haven't given up, we expect to have it in Sweden next year with one of our former people when we held it in Istanbul. So it's alive. A little less well. We lost our organizer, Jason Hoyle of Appalachian State University, because he left the university. So he was the person who made our wonderful website, and Appalachian quit supporting that. And so he was the hands-on person who made the conferences happen. And we miss him greatly, but we're going to try to carry on in his absence. But I want to acknowledge his it's absolutely necessary efforts over the years, and those of the Appalachian wildlife.
It's strange to ask you this question because almost everyone I talked to before said that Stan Thompson was the most important person in Hydrail. So, in your opinion, who was having the biggest influence to Hydrail and these conferences?
Well, we're the ones who decided to have the conferences. Bill and I are both in Mooresville, and Jason was up in Boone. So we spent much more time together, and still do. I spend about an hour with him every day in his jewelry store, and talking about how we can move this along. But Jason was the hands-on person, and he was referred to us very favorably by the state of North Carolina's energy office as being a whiz at putting conferences together. And he had that skill, and he also had the skill of putting together the website, which was running at Appalachian until about 3 years ago. And here's something that's terribly important. We have not been able to get this in the local news, and so I'm better known in Shanghai and Istanbul than I am in Charlotte. And that is the main thing I'd like for us to talk about today, if we may, because it's the way that information does and does not get out. When the internet took away so much of the revenue from newspapers and other conventional media, the effect was that the first people, when they downsized, that they had to let go were the science reporters, and then the business reporters, and then the economics reporters. And so the people who are left there are general reporters who report on scandals and shootings and natural disasters and so forth. And so they are afraid to talk to me because I was unknown, and I stayed unknown because they were afraid to talk to me. And so there was no way to get the knowledge that Hydrail exists. And at this moment, as we speak, 21 years after we first started working with the Charlotte area transit system to create Hydrail, and they were very helpful in the early years. Virtually no one in Charlotte has ever heard that Hydrail exists. And Charlotte is still installing 1880s overhead wire streetcar technology that a Ukrainian, Fyodor Trotsky, created for Tsar Alexander II in St. Petersburg. Now, St. Petersburg is putting in the Hydrail that we invented in Charlotte. And so that's something that I find amusing. But I have spent, of the last 10 years, more of my time trying to get around the Charlotte Observer and get to the public and let them know this goes so that they can start looking at it. Then I spent getting conferences going all over the world. And I've spoken in many, many countries, as you know, on Hydrail. But now I'm speaking on the fact that you can't get in touch with the media. And this is the index of all the things that I sent to the Charlotte Observer. I think the last one, there were 200, and after that, I stopped keeping count. But my dream is to get the Charlotte Observer to cover Hydrail. Again, they covered it once in 2006, and they said we were going to try it. And I found, and this is very interesting, and it's a dark thing in my opinion, that when we said we were going to do this, we had enthusiastic support from public broadcasting, especially. And I was on, Bill and I were on, and maybe Jason were on, I think just Bill and I were on public broadcasting twice talking about what could be done. When we began to get it done after Hydrogenics and Alstom decided, yes, we're going into it. This is something that is going to happen. We'll be first. We got cut off dead. The idea that two old guys in the back room of a jewelry store could change the world is absolute anathema to the general press in Charlotte, and getting them to acknowledge that this exists, and they have been running in Germany for 3 years, and virtually every country outside, except for several in Africa and South America, and we're still working on South, have already committed to this, and yet Charlotte does not know that it exists, and that's why I'm so delighted to be sitting here talking to you, and I'm so grateful for what you've done so far. It has made history and has captured for history what didn't exist otherwise. So take a bow. Thank you.
You're welcome. My next question is about the companies. What do you think, which are the most important companies in Hydrail back then and right now?
The most important one was the one that first decided to go into the business, and that was Alstom of Paris. And they got in touch with Hydrogenics of Mississauga on the outskirts of Toronto, Ontario, and that made all the difference. And they are rapidly deploying. One of the most important companies, though, is the American company Cummins, who wants the first fleet of Hydrail trains was sold in Germany bought Hydrogenics. And so America now has a hand in the deployment of Hydrail in Europe because the holding company is Cummins, which formerly was Cummins Diesel. It's a very large prime mover company, and they make big diesels for trucks, but they are now making big diesels that run on hydrogen. They're still diesels, but they're not carbon-based diesels. They still make those. I don't mean they've quit that, but they're clearly morphing. And then I just learned this morning on the news that the part of the Hydrogenics that was still owned by Air Liquide has been sold to Cummins now. So Cummins, for many years, it was a famous American company. It was Cummins Diesel, and it dated at least back to the 20s. And I've been predicting that it will at some point be Cummins Hydrogen. Now, another important couple of companies is that Canadian Pacific, Kansas City Southern, two railroads just merged, and that gives them a corridor that runs all the way from Ontario to Mexico City. And the CSX Corporation, which is one of the largest, perhaps the largest rail network in the United States, just announced last week they had joined Canadian Pacific, and Canadian Pacific built the first 3 Hydrail freight locomotives. And to go from passenger to freight is a very large step, and it's a very difficult step, but they've accomplished that. But now, and this is something that I predicted a few years ago without knowing which company would do it, they have Kansas City, Canadian Pacific and CSX announced that they will be building kits to convert existing hydrogen trains, hydrogen locomotives, freight locomotives to Hydrail. And we are trying to get that in North Carolina at an old former Alcoa aluminum plant where there's a lot of energy from dams. It's green energy. So wish us luck. So the idea, one thing that's of importance there is that it was never necessary to build new locomotives. The conversion is relatively easy pick and shovel work. And the first one was done by Burlington Northern Santa Fe and put in service in 2008. 2008 was the miracle year for hydrogen. Burlington Northern put the first locomotive in service. Boeing flew the first hydrogen plane, and Iceland launched the first hydrogen ship. In the natural course of history, that should have been the pivoting point. But hydrogen had been endorsed by President George Bush, which was an extraordinary thing because he was an oil man before he was a president. He lived in an oil company, and he was a Texan down in oil country, and yet he saw the future of hydrogen, and he was the one who had the first Hydrail locomotive. Of course, Hydrail had not been, it wasn't named that, but it was BNSF 1205. And right now you can Google BNSF and space 1205 and the word working, and that movie of that one that someone fortunately took and sent to YouTube is still available. And so is the story about the Boeing and the one about Iceland. If you Google Iceland 2008 hydrogen and ship. You can get information on that.
The deal between Hydrogenics and Alstom, what happened there?
There was one of our colleagues named Peter Eggleton whom I think you've interviewed, was a consulting engineer for Hydrogenics, and he was a go-between and essentially facilitated the relationship between Alstom and Hydrogenics from a technical feasibility point of view. So he midwifed this into existence. And thank you for bringing him up, because it would be an unfairness if I had not mentioned him. Thank you for remembering that.
So what's the current status of Hydrail in the US?
The most important thing is this announcement last week that CSX, the really huge corporation, is going to make conversion. It has been announced for some time that San Bernardino was going to have the first passenger train, and it will come out next year. One of the two biggest locomotive builders is meeting with the U.S. Department of Energy's two of their national laboratories, the Oak Ridge National Laboratory and the Argonne National Laboratory, and WebTech. And I don't remember where they were, GE locomotives or General Motors diesel, but they were formerly one of those, and they are working with the U.S. government, and I don't know what doing, but to promulgate this. And Carnegie Mellon University is working with another of the biggest locomotive companies in North America, and so it is progressing. Also, the holding company for Genesee, Wyoming, which is a holding company for a lot of small railroads, connecting railroads that interconnect the big railroads, is vigorously going with Hydrail. I don't know what they've accomplished so far, but they have published their work, and there is some connection in the Deep South between the Canadian Pacific, Kansas City, and the small lines, and I don't know whether that has a connection. But here is what I hope to see. This is my vision, and I suggest it to anyone, and it is that the corridor from Canada to Mexico, and I have named it myself, not the people who owned it. This is just me. The Mexusaka, or MEX USA CA, Mexusaka corridor will be the first Hydrail major freight corridor international, and I hope they choose to do that. But this is just me putting it out there for them to consider. And I would imagine the hydrogen in Canada coming from hydroelectric, where they have a huge amount. But I picture the part in the U.S. being wind, because there's a very, very good wind corridor all the way from Canada to the Mexico line. And of course, Mexico has got lots and lots of sun. So that is something that can happen, and it can happen. And I hope by simply putting it out there where they'll see this and think about it, it might be drawn a little more closely into.
How long do you think this transition will take? Let's say from diesel-powered trains to Hydrail, and what are the key benefits of this technology?
2035, because innovation is born in California and seeps east as California has passed a law that heavy transport will be out of carbon by 2035. And I think that the United States will be largely alone. But I think it may be no later than 2045. And I think it'll be essentially an accomplished thing by 2040.
What are some of the major challenges for Hydrail, for this technology, that it is faced currently with and maybe in the future?
The impediments are not technological. The technology that they put in place in 2008 has been enhanced enormously since then. But even then, it was, first of all, information, because if the general public, this is important, large things like locomotives have got to start in the public and seep in. The public interest has got to be what the manufacturers react to, because they have long depreciation lives. And so there is no reason for anyone in a locomotive company, for internal reasons, to want to go from what exists now to something that doesn't exist, because it's disruptive and it means extra, and then the capital handling situation creates headaches for everybody. And the first one is always expensive. It can't be profitable. And so, because of what we talked about at the first of the interview, since the media do not know about that, that means that the potential investors, the potential shippers, the potential passengers, the environmentalists, the regulators, the employees, the managers, everyone who would benefit by the change doesn't know that it exists. And that overwhelmingly is the reason that it hasn't happened so far. Hydro could be very widely deployed in the United States right now if what was accomplished in 2008 had been shared with the public. But getting around that is a kind of chicken and egg project. And by the way, there's nobody at blame. This is not that somebody's doing it. Everybody is doing what their system was engineered to do. And the media is to make money. And if Elon Musk had invented Hydrail, it would be there. Now here is and I'm an admirer of Elon Musk, in spite of the fact that he said that he talked about fuel cells, and which is in my backyard. But I predict that before 2030, Elon Musk will be building hydrogen powered Teslas.
How do you think the widespread adoption of Hydrail technology will impact the transportation industry as a whole?
Oh, it will take over. And we knew this back in 1998. One of our people that I don't know, have you interviewed Dr. Alistair Miller yet? I can't remember.
Yes.
Of Canada. Well, he was the one who wrote the seminal thing that started all of this. He and Dr. Holger Bush were the first ones in 1998 to raise the possibility of this being done. What Bill and I did was to take their thoughts and figure out how they might be converted to reality, but they were the ones who had the idea. But the important thing that Alistair figured, he did a study on if hydrogen were to take over transportation, or what would be the sequence, and he did his paper is, I hope, online somewhere. But essentially, he said it would be locomotives and boats because they have the ability to carry large volumes and large weights. And then it would be trucks because they're the next most able to. And then airplanes. And he amazed me there because I thought, gee, that is really an astonishing technological leap. But of course, now every airline and every aircraft engine company, especially Rolls-Royce, and every airplane builders has announced that they're going with hydrogen, maybe even quicker than trucks, and that has amazed me. And no one knows that. It's all over the internet, but no one in the media has taken the trouble to see, that there is a paradigm shift well in place. And I hope somebody in media will see what we're doing here and do that. You're trying to get a word in edgewise.
What role do you see government policies and incentives playing in the future of Hydrail?
Thank you. In about 4 years ago, a staffer, Ted Budd, who was then my representative in Congress, and I sat down and we wrote a letter to Elaine Chao, the Secretary of Transportation in the Trump years, but the Assistant Secretary back in the first George Bush years, and a longtime expert. And we said, here is a 10-point way that America can regain the leadership in Hydrail. And she read it and apparently said, okay. And she sent it to a gentleman named Batory, who had been the CEO of Conrail and had just retired and had become the head of the Federal Railway Administration. And he had just got there, and he got this letter. And so the bottom line is that both the Department of Transportation and the Department of Energy had a kickoff meeting about 2017, and they had Germany and France and Canada there, and think something like 7 of the national laboratories, and they started doing it, and it is American policy to do this now, and it is being worked on, and one of my good colleagues is Dr. Sudhita Satyapal, who was the head of hydrogen for the U.S. Department of Energy under both Trump and the current administration, and she has been a very good person to work with. Now, one of the things that I'm working on now is to get an unusual airport about 65 miles from where I'm sitting now, which has got a 5,500-foot runway and was used for training Air Force. I'm trying to make it the test flight for American hydrogen aviation. And I'm also trying to get a paper mill that closed recently to get its people hired to manufacture the kits that CSX and Canadian Pacific want to do. So bringing hydrogen manufacturing back into my home state is one thing I'm doing. Now, and this is a sad thing, 4 manufacturers have come to North Carolina wanting to build Hydrail rolling stock. And because nobody in the state had ever heard of it, they were essentially brushed off. And one of them was Siemens. There were one was a small company from Valencia, Spain, and a small company from Colorado, and a small company from California, and they simply were not taken seriously. They were treated courteously, but they were not encouraged. And so what you should take away from that is ironclad proof that the public has got to know that something exists before business can go into it in heavy. Try to picture a scenario where thousands of steam-powered Conestoga wagons opened the American West, as compared to what really happened, which was the steam locomotive was invented and opened the American West. Big things never start in the retail domain. They start in the heavy domain. And
In your opinion,
excuse me.
what role will hydrogen play in transition to a low carbon economy?
Hydrogen, pardon me, please, is less a thing than renewable energy is a thing. Hydrogen is a subset of renewable energy. Renewable energy has as its consequence that they all happen to be variable and or intermittent. And when you make hydrogen, you can use it whenever you want to. No batteries not included. And so the importance of hydrogen is that it is the means of allowing renewable energy to power things. And your renewable energy will gradually supplant carbon. Carbon has three problems that mean that it's finite, even if it were not for the serious problem of the climate. The climate brought it to attention and made it happen fast. But there are three problems with carbon. In the first place, it's extracted, and that means that at some point in time, it'll all be gone. And at times within our lifetime, it will begin to be gone in certain places. And that creates a logistics and political and sometimes war, as we've seen in Europe right now between Russia and Ukraine. Scarce resources tend to fall into the hands of powerful governments that are anti-democratic. And that's what we're seeing now. The same thing is likely to happen to copper. It is finite. As a futurist, one thing that surprises me is I never meet anybody who has any grasp of what their great-grandchildren are going to be facing. Our great-grandchildren did not understand that fine particulate plastics in the ocean would be a dramatically serious problem right now. But things like that and things like the climate change were understandable back in the day, and things now that are going to exist in 2030 are knowable now. And that's what my role is as a futurist, is to try to get people to understand, that we're going to copper right now is being stolen at a surprising rate because its price is high to make that attractive but when vast amounts of it are used up to power electrical cars, that is going to make it happen more rapidly, and it will at some point start affecting the power grid because people will blow up stuff in the middle of the night to steal the copper. So the idea of an electrification grid based future electrification based on the grid, I think is impossible. And the only other way that mass amounts of intermittent electricity can be sent is in pipes and in tank cars and so forth. And in the case of mobility in the tanks of the mobility. So,
What do you see as the most effective strategy for reducing costs and making hydrogen more competitive with other forms of energy?
I don't have I'm not technically competent to have an opinion on that, except that extraction is going away, and so it would go away not because people are worried about the climate. It'll go away because civilization at large is decided to go away. They were nudged and sped up by the climate thing. But once one thing that's terribly important is that there is no feedstock for renewable hydrogen. You can't run out of it, and it is absolutely free. Now, the cost of the stuff to harvest it, to convert it, and to move it is considerable, and it is the impediment to market entry now. But it's the only impediment because the hydrogen in the ocean can be harvested for more than any need. One thing that's interesting is that you can harvest carbon out of the atmosphere through cryogenics. And you can make jet fuel that's chemically identical with what we're now using, JP3, I think it is, by taking carbon out of the air and water out of the hydrogen out of the ocean and synthesizing hydrocarbons. I mean, hydrocarbons are hydrocarbons. And one of the major airlines is considering that as their means of going zero carbon, because you can just use the same planes without modifying them at all. But the cost of making that much conversion material, it is problematical. And so most of the aviation folks are looking at either electrochemical, and that seems to have the upper hand, and going back to propellers, or running hydrogen in jets, and that is being pursued vigorously. The interesting thing is, and this gets into a little futurist how we go about things. Change happens in three phases. One is the innovation, and picture a kind of a dual hockey stick graph. Innovation is when new stuff happens and it doesn't change much, but then it goes into integration phases, and that's when the state of the art and scale economics do their thing, and it gets bigger and bigger and better, and it's like steam locomotives were in 1954 when the last one was made. And then it goes about as far as it can go compared to the next big thing. Well, right now, diesel is up at the top of this hockey stick, and hydrogen is just at the beginning and beginning to turn up. And it's like cars were in 1903 or 1910. All sorts of things were being introduced, and it's by no means clear, and does not need to be clear, which one is going to triumph. The one that's going to triumph may actually not even be on the drawing board yet. But once people have seen that it is the future, then the same thing that Henry Ford and Edison and Tesla did is doing its thing behind the scenes now. Not necessarily in great big corporations. Great big corporations let these things be tried and failed in little companies, and when it fails, they put money in to try again, and putting it in, right? And when it gets good, then they gobble it up, like Cummins did Hydrogenics.
How do you see the role of hydrogen evolving in the global energy mix over next decade?
Many countries have said that their last diesel locomotive will be gone by 2035. 2035 is emerging as the year when the last diesel goes out and the lights turn out. Now, that's also true, I think, of trucks. Aviation will be far along by that time. And oddly enough, merchant marine will be far along, because much merchant marine, I learned fairly recently, is like diesel electric locomotives. They have a prime mover that turns a generator, and there are motor pods with the propellers on them, and that allows them to maneuver and dock without needing tugboats. And so there's a fair number there. So converting the merchant marine, a good portion of the merchant marine, is going to be easier than I would have suspected. So things that go on land will be very largely hydrogen by 2035. There's something like 33,000 diesel locomotives in the United States. The big impediment is not anything to do with money or material. Nobody is being trained. There are no, or virtually no, hydrail engineering schools in the United States. Back in 10 years ago, we started brokering a connection between the railway school at Birmingham and the University of Charlotte, but we could not get the Charlotte people to grasp that this was something that was coming, and it just kind of fizzled out. It's just one person left there. There's two people have got to engineer these. Even the drop-in ones have got to have applications engineering, and there have got to be people in community college who are trained to physically do the hands-on work and supervise the hands-on work. That is the big impediment, not money, not tech, state of the art, but there is not the workforce, and there is not the mechanism to put the workforce in place. And that is one of the big consequences of the media not knowing enough to interview people as you are now. And so that people say, oh, I can do that, and this is going to be big jobs. And if I get in early, then I'll have a management pathway with very little competition. Yeah. But nobody knows it. There's a picture behind me now of a gentleman named Erskine Bowles, and he was the chief of staff under President one of the early Clinton. And when he left there, he became the president of the North Carolina University system, and we have 17 universities. About that time, there was a tsunami in the East, and he was one of the people sent to help orchestrate the American relief. And he saw kids in China in the first grade studying math on computers in English. And he came back and said that if we don't begin to develop our STEM workforce, science, technology, engineering, math, 80% of the engineers in the world are going to be in Asia by I think it was 2014, and that happened. He helped me create a science and technology section in the Charlotte Observer and the Raleigh News and Observer, and that ran for about 4 years, and it was used by teachers to take science that was going on in the Carolinas and to teach it so kids would be drawn into STEM thing and go to universities in North Carolina, and we would eventually have a workforce. So we tried to fix this, not just for hydrogen, but for just to build a STEM workforce for the well-being of the future prosperity of the state. So, but there's a limit to what you can do if the public is not made aware of what's going on. And trying to fix that is what you're helping with, and you're doing more good if you can get people to, a large number of people to see what you've done. You will have had more effect on the good of mankind than you can imagine.
Stan, thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you for letting me join you. And I apologize that I had the time zones wrong. I was all ready to meet with you after lunch, but I think it probably came out better than it might have if I'd over prepared.
Thank you very much.